Hi everyone. Today I'm going to go back to some February 2023 new releases in Blu-ray, and in this case 4K UHD. This is the Kino Lorber release of Marathon Man, a movie from 1976 directed by John Schlesinger, starring Dustin Hoffman, Laurence Olivier, Roy Scheider, Martin Keller, from a book by William Goldman. And this was the era of big best-selling thriller novels that made successful transitions to Hollywood movies. You can think of Jaws and The Exorcist and Deliverance and The Godfather. Everybody was reading these books, so it seemed, and so everybody eagerly anticipated what the movie version would be like. Now, before I get into the movie, I have to talk about the DolbyVision because it's absolutely superb. We get a real, a good, effective illustration of Conrad Hall, the cinematographer's style. And although I can't say, well, yeah, this is what the film looked like in 1976 or any individual film, I saw hundreds of movies in the movie theater in the 1970s, and this looks, to me, to my eyes, this looks like what 1970s movies look like. In my 65-inch TV, UHD, it might have looked better. It might have looked better on the TV when I watched it a few nights ago than it did in the movie theater, as much as I prefer seeing movies in movie theaters. So it's a thriller, but it's also playing very much into the sort of sense of paranoia that was pervasive through the 1970s. So it's one of the paranoid thrillers. It's kind of at the end of the paranoid thriller era, but it's very effective nevertheless when Americans, you know, so there's people out there that are controlling what's going on. Secret departments in the government. Rogue elements, perhaps, that are accountable to no one, outside of the CIA, the FBI, that have unquestioned power. They can do whatever they want. So that is one element of the plot of this film. And another one is ex-Nazis living in South America, hiding in South America. They have escaped to South America after Germany fell. So 76, we're only 30 years away. So these people would still, some of these people would probably be in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. And the plot revolves around the narrative, the storyline that one of these men, a very famous person from the Nazi regime who was in the death camps and tortured in his own way. He was well known by the people in the camps. He was greatly reviled. So, but through circumstances, he has to make a trip to New York City from his well-armed sanctuary in South America to retrieve diamonds. And this is really the linchpin of the story. But we not only get that, we get paranoia, we get ex-Nazis, we also get a storyline that involves Dustin Hoffman, where his father, in the 1950s, was a victim of the McCarthy witch hunt. He was accused of being a communist and couldn't take the pressure, became alcoholic when Dustin Hoffman's character was a young man, or a young boy, and he commits suicide. So now Dustin Hoffman is studying for his PhD. His thesis is on tyranny in the United States, and he is, the implication is he's going to try to reveal perhaps that these accusations against his father were false. So we get these alternate storylines, and part of the fun of the movie for me, I love these kind of movies where they don't tell you everything in the beginning. You have to really pay attention, and you wonder, how are these storylines ever going to come together? Well, they all do eventually. But we do get New York City in the beginning, and a very jarring change to Paris, and then another one to Uruguay. So we have these three elements. The location photography in Paris, and especially in New York City, where most of the movie is set, is simply terrific. So So we get alternate storylines, the slow burn we have to pay attention. Is it ever going to come together? It does. We get reveals. We get some exposition that explains some of it to us, but we get some very, very, very effective twists and turns and double crosses. And it is, as the movie's title indicates, it is a story about running. Dustin Hoffman runs. And he's training evidently for a marathon. And he is 40 years old, a PhD student, maybe be 25, 26. He thought he was too old for the part, but he always looked younger than his actual age, even in the graduate. When I think it was 30 years old or something and just graduated from college. So he gets in really good shape. He loses 20 pounds. He really wanted to play dedicate himself to this movie, and runs and runs and runs. And he runs through, I mean, this is an accurate title. He's on the run through the whole movie. It's about the pain, running through the pain. Pain is a big element when we get to the torture scene. So we get great views of New York City in particular. 1976, it was one of the great sets in the movie era, one of the great sets in the history of movies. So we see Hoffman running around the New York City Reservoir in Central Park. Lots of street scenes, lots of extras. We get, in buses and cars, and we see the store signs. I was delighted to see a chock full of nuts automat. That was it's probably the waning years of the automat by 1976, but chock full of nuts was so famous. When I was a little boy, when I was taken to New York City for to see sports or the theater, I always wanted to go to the automat, and chock full of nuts was like a real treat for me to go to, but it was for many people. I mean, by the 70s, the popularity was on the wane, but there was a time, I guess, in the 1930s, during the Depression in particular, where you could get a cheap cup of coffee that was fantastic, and you could eat a meal very quickly for a very low price. And the commentary is really good by Nathaniel Thompson and Steve Mitchell. And Mitchell lived in New York City. He was living in New York City in 1976. So he really knows every landmark, where everything was filmed, the FDR Drive, the Brooklyn Bridge, and different, what street are we on here, what street are we on there. And of course, growing up close to New York City and living fairly close, and especially in the 1970s, where on Saturdays and Sundays, I would go into New York and I would walk. I loved to walk in New York from repertory theater to repertory theater. So these scenes, even though New York is in dire decline in the 1970s, it had such energy, such character. I just love the energy. As soon as you get off the bus in the Port Authority terminal and you walk in the streets, it's like you're entering some other world. And to get to some of the performances here. Dustin Hoffman, great, method actor and great identification. Audiences really identified with Hoffman. He was a big star in the 1970s. Roy Scheider, really, talk about being in shape. Roy Scheider was just amazingly in shape. And there is a fight scene in the movie where Scheider, he saw that they were going to use doubles, to make the fight really convincing. But he was a martial arts expert, and the villain who's trying to kill him is also a martial arts victim. He said, "No, I want to do this." He did the whole scene himself and did suffer some minor injuries during the filming of that scene. But he's really good. William Devane, one of his earlier roles, I believe, and he was always a very dependable actor. I believe he's still with us, and I believe he's still acting as well. Marta Keller, a Swiss actress. She'd never been in an English language movie yet, I don't believe. But she didn't know English, so she had to learn her lines phonetically. You might catch John Hurd. He is this is before he was getting significant roles, and you got to look close to see him. Hoffman is running into one of his buildings late for a class, and he asks this guy a question as he's running by, and the guy who runs after him, and that is indeed John Hurd. And there are many other great character actors here, but really this is a film that belongs to, I mean, it's memorable as far as performances is for Laurence Olivier, who is suffering from health problems. He hadn't worked the past few years before Marathon Man. He had cancer. He had other infirmities like gout, where he had trouble walking. They sent him the script, and he just loved the part. He's the bad guy. And he's playing a former torturer of the death camps, and his form of torture is due to the fact that he had been a dentist, is using his dental implements to torture his victims into telling the truth of what he wants to hear in the context of this film. And the dental scenes were so strong that William Goldman tells a story that the first time he saw the movie was at a Times Square theater packed on a Saturday night. And by this time, the storyline or everybody knew, well, a lot of people knew that these dental scenes were, you might not be able to endure, and they're so strong. And he saw a slew of people leave right before the dental scenes came. And then when the scenes were over, they went back to their seat. And Robert Evans, who produced this film, was the head of Paramount at the time, he thought, well, maybe we better we better tone this down if the audiences didn't like it. But I guess today, you know, we're so jaded with all that stuff. It's certainly in 1976, this was strong stuff. And maybe even today, because everybody hates to go to the dentist, and when the dentist puts his drill in his mouth, they wonder, I hope he doesn't miss the required target. And Olivier is fantastic as the villain here. I think it's one of the great screen villains. Despite his infirmities, he gave everything to this part, and the way he plays it. In the supplements, we hear about his approach to the role. And of course, he was not a method actor, so he and Dustin Hoffman did clash throughout the film. And the supplements are really worth watching, because you see in one of the supplements that came out as publicity for the film, you see Olivier and Hoffman in not a heated discussion, but in a very animated discussion of how exactly they should play a particular scene. And it's just great. And I mean, Olivier is really a living, at that time, he was a living legend. And miraculously enough, his cancer went into remission after this film, and he became employable again. He was not, they couldn't insure him. They had to beg Lloyd's of London Robert Evans, the producer, had to beg Lloyd's of London to insure him. But with the cancer in remission, he kept on working. He wanted to work because he had this large family, and he wanted to provide for them. And he was such a big name, you could put his name, you know, into the movie, and you had instant prestige. They were willing to pay him a lot of money for that, but he always gave his all, no matter. And some people complain that Olivier's harmed his legacy by playing in what would be what many people would see as films beneath his talent. But certainly here in Marathon Man, this is like I say, this is absolutely great performance of a villain. So the movie did great. This was a very successful Paramount release. It was Robert Evans was still on a roll. He you know, as the head of Paramount, he's responsible for a whole lot of great movies, including Chinatown. In fact, Robert Towne wrote the final scene. William Goldman also wrote the screenplay, but Dustin Hoffman didn't like the ending. So Robert Towne was brought in. This is past Chinatown. Robert Towne wrote the screenplay for Chinatown. Good friend of Robert Evans, so he brought him in to write that final scene. And Goldman says in these supplements that, you know, I thought the ending was terrible. The ending in the book, and I think both Thompson and Steve Mitchell prefer the ending of the book as well. But Goldman said, you know, it played so well with audiences. Audiences really like the ending. It is a great set that they built for the ending. It was very impressive. So overall, you know, a really interesting return to the 1970s for me. Very entertaining film. Has plot holes in it. I will not deny it. There's plot holes there. And it looks absolutely fabulous in DolbyVision. Okay, thanks a lot for everybody who managed to listen. I do appreciate it. Comments are welcome. Take care.